much for joining us at this CARICOM Pavilion for the CCSA Investor Forum, Leveraging Climate Finance to Build Caribbean Resilience. So this is something that we do quarterly. We have Investor Forum where we focus on a project and we showcase that project while we also have investors on the panel. And in doing so, what we're hoping to do is to match make projects in real time. So we talk to the investors about their investment interest, while we talk to the projects about what they're looking for, and to see if there is interest on both sides. If there isn't interest on both sides, then what we do is we keep the project in mind for other potential investors, but we also keep the investor in mind for other potential projects. Because what we have been finding, and I don't know if you've heard a lot about this, is that as much as we talk about the need for climate finance, our view is it's a bit more nuanced than that. It is more about not necessarily having fit-for-purpose finance for the projects that we have in the region. So, with that, I will say, my name is Raquel Moses. I'm the CEO of the Caribbean Climate-Smart Accelerator, and this is our first live investor forum here at COP27, and thank you all so very much for joining us. So I'm sure for all of you, when you are coming to COP, everybody asks, what do you hope to gain from COP? What is your objective? And there are three main objectives that we've had, and we're going to focus the three panels that we'll have on those main objectives. The first one is to highlight the need for fit-for-purpose funding. So to talk about the fact that we do have lots of projects in the region, but the challenge that we have is finding the right kind of funding, because we need far more philanthropic and catalytic funding available for the projects that we have and to help prepare them so that they're commercially ready. So that's the first thing that is an objective of ours. The second thing is, and one of the main things that we want to see at COP, is a solution around loss and damage. And how do we fund adaptation and address loss and damage? And as much as we're looking for a global solution, there are some regional activities taking place that we are already using to address loss and damage. And so we'll talk a little bit about that on the second panel. And then finally, one of the things that is certainly, I think, a great need of ours is to highlight the solutions that we have. There are some magnificent solutions from across the Caribbean region that just don't get enough airplay. And so we want to highlight some of those things, because as much as we are on the front lines of climate change as a region, we are not just the victims. We are also incredibly innovative and coming up with wonderful solutions like the recovery duration adjuster that I'm a huge fan of, but other solutions as well, like the Climate-Smart Map and the Resilience Scorecard. And so we want to showcase some of the solutions that are available from the region and to highlight that we should be a source of participating in bringing innovation to the table from the region. So with that, I wanted to start with a little bit of a change, and I wanted to start with the loss and damage panel first. So I'm going to invite Dr. Colin Young, the Executive Director of the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, Isaac Anthony, the CEO of the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, and Sarah Conway, the Director of Ecosystem Resilience at Willis Towers Watson. Please welcome them to the stage. All right, thank you so much. So I want to start with just a brief introduction of what each of the organizations do, so that they get a sense of what your portfolio entails and how you address adaptation and loss and damage, and what are you looking, just a bit of an overview before we get into the questions. Is that okay? Can I start with Sarah? Hello?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Conway. I am the director at Willis Towers Watson, WTW. I sit within something we call the Climate and Resilience Hub, which is a cross-cutting business unit. WTW is a very large, about 45,000 people operating in over 100 countries globally, risk and advisory services company. But we in the Climate and Resilience Hub, we provide support on sort of all the climate-related issues. So we focus on climate physical risk, transition risk, liability risk. My specific team is asset risk finance and parametrics. We focus on a range of things. I specifically support our ecosystem resilience practice, so helping to design trigger-based, prearranged parametric insurance solutions essentially to help protect ecosystems like coral reefs and to also support the livelihoods that are dependent on those ecosystems like small-scale fisherfolk. I'll stop there for now. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Colin Young. I'm the Executive Director of the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, known as the 5 Cs, not easier to say, to remember. We are a CARICOM institution that was set up by the heads of government of 15 Caribbean countries to coordinate the Caribbean's response to climate change. We've been doing that since 2005, and we do that through the provision of 3 key buckets of services. One is climate data and information for evidence-based decision making. For example, we've installed automatic weather stations all over the Caribbean and coral reef and warning systems to collect data that can feed into policy. Secondly, we are a delivery partner to member states to mobilize climate finance, and we mobilized over $260 million to invest in primarily adaptation initiatives and public good type investments. And third, we assist the Caribbean in coordinating our priorities in the global COP negotiating process. So we invite ministers and policymakers along with negotiators, and we craft our positions as a region for negotiating in AOCs.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel. My name is Isaac Anthony, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the CRIF SPC, formerly Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility. CRIF was actually established in the year 2007, and in fact was actually inspired by Hurricane Ivan, which impacted the region, but more especially Grenada and the Cayman Island. In a sense, it really represented a wake-up call to the government who realized, given the severity of the damage, that there was need to have some kind of disaster risk financing mechanism. And that whole process led to the creation of CRIF. But the whole idea is for CRIF to establish to be able to provide quick liquidity to governments in the immediate aftermath of the disaster. And we always try, and we have always done consistently, to make payouts within a period of 14 days. Currently, we have 22 member governments, and which includes 19 from the Caribbean and 3 from Central America. And we also have added electric utilities because in 2020 we were able to launch a product designed for the electric utilities company. As you know, typically those entities are able to obtain insurance for transmission and distribution assets. So we are functioning very well. We've been able to make our payments on time, and our products are mainly for tropical cyclone, excess rainfall, and earthquakes. And we've been able to add additional products. For example, we developed and launched a product designed specifically for the fishing sector, and currently we are looking to do more.
Wonderful. So I'm going to start with Sarah again. So what do you see as the private sector's role in addressing, loss and damage and coming up with innovations that can help to support the global conversation on loss and damage?
Yeah, great. So, obviously the private sector is a pretty heterogeneous group. And of course, addressing loss and damage requires very context and location-specific solutions. But I can try to speak to a few examples. So turning, I guess, first to the insurance and reinsurance industry, sort of primarily where we focus at WTW. Risk, identifying, modeling, managing risk is really at the core of what the insurance sector does. And today, there's no greater risk, of course, than the risk of climate change. So generally speaking, I think we're seeing greater recognition of the role that the industry can play in helping to enable the transition to a low carbon, low emission, climate resilient future. I think at the same time, we're starting to see increasing momentum within the industry to helping to design solutions to avert, minimize, and address loss and damage more specifically. I think there's a lot more happening now. There's a lot less of the sort of reactivity to events and more proactivity by the industry. Meaning, for example, that as the frequency and intensity of climate-related natural hazards increases, there is a role for the reinsurance and insurance industry to play in shifting from a lot of ex-post, humanitarian aid supporting reconstruction activities to a shift towards more ex-ante instruments and mechanisms that can make sure that there's accessible indemnity and parametric products, so that in places where current penetration is low and where the ability to recover from climate shocks is also low. Beyond the insurance and reinsurance industries, I think what we're starting to see from some of our more corporate clients is a broader recognition and interest by the corporate sector in supporting the design and implementation of prearranged trigger-based instruments like parametric insurance products, including forecast-based finance as well. In this case, what's interesting is they are also open to not only supporting the design of these instruments, but paying the premiums to allow for their deployment. So, for companies that are relying on areas for their supply chain that are climate vulnerable, they are trying to get these solutions in place, paying for the policies to really ensure that resources are made available rapidly and at the scale required to support the communities in which they themselves depend, but in recognition of their role as good corporate citizens. So I think, again, we're seeing a lot of good positive momentum in the private sector space.
Wonderful, and thank you. So just to go to you, Colin, so how does 5Cs approach adaptation on behalf of the region and supporting that backfill that needs to happen?
Thank you, Raquel, and let me first thank you for inviting the 5Cs to be a part of this panel. And I know this is an investor forum, and talking about adaptation, obviously the inherent mismatch is that oftentimes adaptation really has a clear business case or rate of return from an investor point of view. In fact, most of the work that the 5Cs would have been doing in the region are considered public goods. And because by the nature they're public goods, citizens expect that these services are provided by the public sector. Nonetheless, the 5Cs we are a country-responsive institution. We work with the countries where they are and what they want to do in terms of trying to deliver climate finance to build climate resilience, particularly in the adaptation space. So the way we approach this is obviously from understanding what are the risks and what are the biggest threats. And when you're from the Caribbean, the biggest threats obviously would be tropical cyclones, which create all kinds of damages and losses that can happen. We also are worried about things like droughts that are becoming more and more frequent and extreme. We're also seeing extreme rainfall events. As you know, with every 1 degree rise in ambient temperature, the air holds 7% more moisture. And so now we're seeing in about 6-7 hours getting a foot of rainfall. Our entire infrastructure, like our drainage systems, were not constructed to deal with the runoff of a foot of rainfall in hours. And then obviously we're also seeing some of the more slow onset events, like sea level rise, and the concomitant increase in coastal erosion that is now threatening coastal infrastructure, including critical infrastructure, utilities, electricity, water, and then that's a good segue into saying that with increased sea level rise, we're seeing an increase in the salinity of our freshwater systems. And so hurricanes, water, both too much and sometimes and too little at other times, and then sea level rise. And so what we try to do in terms of the 5Cs is rather than approaching these sectors as a one-off project in a one-off sector, we try to wrap these into multi-sectoral projects that really marries water, energy, food security into a single program. And by doing so, what happens is that all of a sudden you can take an area like is that here? Okay, sorry. We can take an area like renewable energy, which normally you would see as a mitigation area for which there is a clear rate of return. But for us, the renewable energy is only a means to an end, and is a critical part of our resilience and our adaptation. So, for example, when I'm using solar PV systems to pump fresh water to residents, so that in the event there is a storm that destroys the generation capacity, residents can still get water because they're using solar PV. That is key to the water security. But investors now can come in on the renewable energy part, for which there is a clear rate of return. But really the entire reason why we're doing the renewable energy is in fact to build our adaptation resilience to our water security storm event issue. And then of course we have the water part where we are reusing, recycling water. And then there's the link to food security, because we're getting that reused water, recycled water, to areas like the agricultural parts of the country via a pipeline, where we're replenishing aquifers when you have too much, and you're decreasing the demand on that water by users. Now, if I can link food security with water, I can reduce the risk that my farmers will experience in terms of depending on rainfall for their crops. And if I can show now that my productivity per hectare is going to yield a certain amount of yield, now I can crowd in financing on that end as well to help stimulate investment. So for us, we're really looking at multiple sectors, timing things that are traditionally on their own just mitigation, and then making it in an adaptation resilience envelope for which there's elements that both MDBs and private sector can come in on those portions for which there's a business case. But what we do as a part of the process is because of the data analytics and all the data we do collect, we are de-risking the investment for the private sector, so that they get a better sense of what are the risks, they can mitigate the risks, and as a result, the premium on the rate of return that they want theoretically should be lower, which allows greater participation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Colin. That was really informative. So, Isaac, tell us about CRIF and some of the tools that it has and some of the events it's responded to.
So, one of the things that we have observed is that despite the efforts that are being made on the mitigation and adaptation side, the impact of climate change continues. And that is not to suggest that we should stop the effort, we need to continue. But one point that I want to make very early is that disaster risk financing, has a very important to play in loss and damage. I remember in the very early days when CRIF was established, and then there was a lot of promotion around disaster risk insurance. There was a lot of pushback on insurance and disaster risk financing. And I understand why this was happening, because people didn't want, some of the perhaps very important conversations around, loss and damage, to be understated. But I'm really pleased to see how disaster risk financing has come to play a very important part. But as you said, insurance is a very important aspect of this whole thing. And what we have seen is that with the advent of disaster risk insurance, particularly the insurance that parametric insurance that the risk pools like PRIF and the African risk capacity, as well as the PICRIC in South Pacific plays, it is certainly helping to make resources available to governments quickly. Governments do not want to wait 6 months to obtain financial resources. This is too late. They want the funds immediately because they want to be able to respond to the needs of the vulnerable, of the poor, and the people who are impacted. I mean, look at some of the more recent events. And just to give you an example, I mean, as recent as last week, there was a significant rainfall event that affected, that focused on just one small part of my country, St. Lucia, as well as Dominica. And while it did not cover the entire country, a small percentage of the country, but the impact was so severe. I mean, homes were flooded, vehicles were washed away, schools flooded, and so on, leaving the government with a significant bill. That's the reality that we are dealing with today. And so you need to have an instrument that can help respond. Now, the instruments are not necessarily perfect, and I must admit this particular event that we had last week was a very unusual one. But what we are now seeing is a lot of unusual events owing to the impact of climate change. Exactly. It essentially, that particular event, was a localized event. Didn't affect the entire country, just a small part of the north of St. Lucia, and as well as in the case of Dominica, the eastern part, but we saw the damage as being very severe. So the products that we're providing in terms of tropical cyclone and excess rainfall have become very important climate risk insurance initiatives. We're also looking to do more. One of the products that we are looking to develop is one in collaboration with Caribbean Development Bank, which is a multi-peril agricultural insurance product, which is really designed to address the needs of farmers. For years now, we've been struggling with agricultural insurance, and we know that these are some of the more vulnerable people in our community. Agriculture continues to be a very important sector, and as we talk about food security and the need to try to optimize that economic sector in terms of enhancing the export potential of it, we should not give up on it, but we must address some of the inherent challenges to that sector. And one of the main issues, of course, is the whole question of risk transfer. So, it's a very important aspect, insurance, and I know that a lot of people still frown on it. It's taken a little bit of time for us to embrace it, but it is a very important tool to help governments as well as individuals manage their risk. And one of the good things about CRIF, given the fact that we are set up as a development insurer, we operate akin to what we would say a not-for-profit organization. All the benefits that we derive from these resources are plowed right back for the benefit of the countries, of the members, etc. So I will stop here for now, but one of the good things that I would like to say is that there's a lot of potential now to develop additional products. For example, there's drought, and there's Simon and Bruno, and I'm sure can probably say one or two things about that particular initiative. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Isaac. So Sarah, are there enough private sector players willing to get involved and that can almost create a network or create a robust enough infrastructure to help to bridge some of the gaps that we have?
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're starting to see a lot of good positive momentum, both within the insurance industry as well as the broader corporate sector, private sector community. And I think a lot of that positive momentum is with thanks to the sort of increasing private sector-led collaborations as well as public-private sector collaborations. At WTW, we've been really a firm believer in the role that the importance of the private sector in contributing to address global issues, and have worked with the UN and the broader development community for decades now. Often this has been through public-private sector collaborations. Maybe just quickly to name a few. Back at COP21 in Paris, WTW helped to launch the Insurance Development Forum, the IDF. The IDF is on a mission, to optimize and extend the use of insurance and its related risk management capabilities to build greater resilience and protection for people, for communities, for businesses, and public institutions as well that are vulnerable to disasters and their associated economic shocks. WTW is also a founding member of ORA, the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, which is government, civil society, private sector, all coming together. It has helped to fund and develop a number of parametric insurance solutions aimed at financially empowering coastal communities, many in the CARICOM region. We've been a part of a number of those as well. So I think through these public-private sector collaborations in particular, I think we're beginning to see much more momentum in action on behalf of the private sector side.
Fabulous. We're huge fans of Aura. Karen Sack is doing a phenomenal job leading Aura. All right, so Colin, given the progress or lack of momentum on loss and damage, what is the role of things like blue carbon as an opportunity to help fund adaptation in the absence of closing the financial gap on loss and damage and adaptation?
Thank you, Raquel. Let me answer that question by saying I think one of the fundamental principles of small island developing states as it relates to loss and damage is that loss and damage financing ought to be grants. Right? So, and what adaptation, we can fund that from concessional resources as well as grants, and then mitigation, we're looking, because of the private sector, we can do primarily private sector financing. And so as part of if you accept what CARICOM countries along with AOSIS has maintained as a polluter pay sort of principle, then clearly we're looking at a loss and damage financing facility that would then provide grants and help to capitalize and pay for insurance premium that is going up and up. Because insurance works well when you have random events that are spread over a period of time and it's not predictable, and you can spread the risk over a large market. But when you're getting 3 Category 5 hurricane in one hurricane season that impacts so many of your insurers, if you happen to get that 2 or 3 years in a row, which the predictions are suggesting, you'll have a 70 to 80% increase in Category 4 and 5 hurricanes. It has a very important role to play in rapid liquidity. But what has happened over time is that the developed countries have tried, in a sense, to have us pay the premium to cover loss and damage for something that they have caused. And so I thought I would say that. But obviously, the more you invest in adaptation, every dollar you invest in adaptation, you are decreasing the amount of money you need for recovery. And so that's very, very important. Innovative financial instruments like blue bonds, green bonds, debt for climate swaps, and carbon markets, participation in carbon markets, can in fact be used to capitalize national funds that can help with adaptation, as well as provide some quick liquidity in the event of national disaster funds for loss and damage. But I also want to indicate that is fast becoming impossible. In other words, our capacity to adapt is being overwhelmed because of the severity of the loss and damage. And that is where loss and damage under the convention comes in. It is really when we are no longer able to adapt that there is the loss and damage. And the CEB, for example, talks about this recovery adjuster. When floods hit Germany this year, they were able to mobilize $30 billion for investments in rebuilding what was the disaster. and they invested another couple of billion in early warning systems. The ability of our countries to mobilize that kind of resources when the fiscal space is almost not there is impossible. So you need innovative instruments, you need philanthropy, you need the private sector, you need the mechanisms under the convention to be able to provide financing in a crowdsourcing kind of way to ensure that we get predictable, timely financing at scale for us to adapt. So right now the financing that is trickling to the region is so tiny and so minuscule that we need to look at all of the various modalities and sources to be able to coordinate how that money is going to flow to help with adaptation. I think that has to be the strategy. And while we are advocating at a COP like this and demanding that countries do more and quicker, we also have to be ensuring that we can do what we can within our countries to be able to adapt and then deal with the losses and damages.
Thanks so much, Colin. So, Isaac, I wanted to ask you how you feel about the conversation that's happening now at COP on loss and damage, but I also wanted to understand a couple of things. One, do you think that the issue with the paying of the premiums, like, should it be the region's responsibility to pay the premiums? And two, whether you think that is the pushback that you're getting on using insurance as a tool.
Right, thank you. I was actually going to address that question, whether you're asking about. But first of all, let me say that Colin made a point a while ago, which really actually supports the need for insurance. And again, it has to do with some of the limitations. In other words, with adaptation and so on, you can only go so far. There will always be a residual risk that you need to manage. And I think that really provides some of the justification for insurance. The other point that I want to make, and maybe in defense of the donors, because to be frank with you, without the support and the involvement of the donor community in CRIF and the African Risk Capacity and the other risk pools, we would not have been in existence today. When CRIF was established in the year 2007, the donors contributed about $67 million in capital. Those were grant resources, and over the years, they have actually been contributing. The whole idea is to provide as much capital to those risk pools so that, number one, they can actually help to retain the risk in the portfolio, thereby minimizing on the risk transfer costs to the reinsurance community. Yes, it is true that the governments are playing their part, and to be honest, I'm not one of those who's a strong advocate for maybe countries, premiums having to be paid. I think if you really want to take insurance seriously, you have to be prepared to pay your insurance or at least be part of it. So the reality is that the countries do have their fiscal constraints, fiscal space issues, and I know it's a challenge. But to the credit of the Caribbean, what I can say is that countries have been paying the insurance from day one with very little issues because they have come to accept and embrace the importance of insurance. And that is the kind of discipline I think that we need to maintain on all levels when we look when we talk about managing risk. There have been some notable maybe exceptions, and that is only because some other countries have run into some issues. And just to highlight Haiti, when Haiti was struck by this massive earthquake, first of all in 2010 and more recently I think last year, clearly it would have put Haiti in a very difficult position, and so again the donors came to their assistance. And I remember when Dominica was impacted by Maria, I know that I think the government of Canada, as well as in collaboration with CDB, was able to provide support. But it was only for a certain period of time. So yes, ideally, we would love for somebody else to pay the premium, but the reality is that the donors have in fact been contributing, if you want to say in an indirect way, to maintain the premium of the country.
All right, so unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this panel. I want to thank Isaac and Sarah and Colin very, very much for taking this time. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of the conversation, so hopefully we'll get another chance to continue and continue to talk through what are some of the opportunities that exist, because I think it's easy to kind of sit back and talk about all of the things that are not happening. But as long as we're taking the perspective of, okay, well, this is what somebody else needs to do, then we're all sitting in a circle pointing at each other. We're going to have to figure out what are the things that we can do and to be able to put ourselves in a better situation while continuing to advocate for what we know must happen on a global scale. So thank you both so much, and then I will introduce the next panel. All right, so from we have Helen Mirovic, the head of climate change at IDB Invest. We have Nelson Moharo, head of innovation partnerships at the International Chamber of Shipping, and we have Francine Barron, who is the executive director of CREED for Dominica. All right, so on this panel, we're going to be talking about the preparation of projects for fit for purpose funding. And so I will again ask each of you to start by introducing your organizations and the work that you do. I'm going to start with Francine.
Thank you very much, Raquel. Thank you. My name is Francine Barron. I'm the CEO of the Climate Resilience Execution Agency for Dominica. It's a special agency that was created by the government of Dominica post-Hurricane Maria in 2017, which is designed to lead Dominica's resilience journey. We have an ambitious goal to become the first climate resilient country by 2030, and CREED was tasked with developing the framework for that to happen.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Nelson Moharo. I am from the International Chamber of Shipping based in London, representing ship owners, 80% of the worldwide fleet through the associations. My work is related to shipping's decarbonization, particularly for the use of alternative fuels by the shipping sector or for transporting these fuels around the world. Shipping announced at COP26 the aim to become net zero, at least from the industry, and we're working towards that.
Wonderful.
Hi, my name is Ilan Mejrovic. I am the head of climate change at IDB Invest. IDB Invest is the private sector arm of the IDB Group, the multilateral development bank that works in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Wonderful. All right. So the reason that we have Francine and Nelson and Helen with us is because one of the things that we feature, one of the projects that we feature is Dominica's transition into geothermal and the potential that provides to us as a region for the exploration of green hydrogen. And so, it seemed really great to have Francine together with Nelson, who is looking at decarbonization and fuels for decarbonization, and to talk through about the opportunity for private sector investment to enable that to happen. So Francine, tell me a little bit about Dominica's geothermal potential and Dominica's geothermal exploration.
Sure. Just to let you know that Dominica is 289 square miles, and we have 9 active volcanoes on that small piece of land. What that translates to is that we have significant geothermal resources. We have 6 geothermal reserves on island, and we've looked at the sustainable use of those geothermal resources in order to be able to provide not only for our geothermal, our electricity needs, power generation, but also looking at the possibility of that being used to spur the green industrialization of Dominica. So we know we have significant resources. We're actually working towards the first geothermal plant, which will be in the south of the island, which will be designed to provide energy for domestic use but we're also looking at investing in the development of the geothermal resources in the north of the island. And we're looking at that from the viewpoint of being able to use geothermal resources to develop green hydrogen. We think that there is significant potential in that area. We're currently working together with Kenneth J. Green Limited out of Trinidad in looking at the possibility of developing a 200 megawatt geothermal plant in the north of the island, which is designed to be able to produce green hydrogen. What we've done is to identify within Trinidad the need for green hydrogen, and knowing that we have the ability to produce the green hydrogen, we're partnering with them in that development. We have ensured that we put in place a proper legal framework to allow for that to happen. And we are currently, and I should say to you, Raquel, that in relation to our geothermal in the south of the island, we have already drilled the wells. We know that there's a resource. We know the performance of that resource. So that is clear. We're doing a geothermal mapping exercise that's being conducted by the University of the West Indies. And that is going to provide us with further information as to where exactly are the best places for us to be able to further develop our geothermal. So that holds a lot of potential. We know that there is demand for green hydrogen within the region itself. There is demand outside of the region, but we know that there is significant demand within Trinidad itself for green hydrogen. And we are seeking to position ourselves to be able to provide the green hydrogen that's needed. And as part of that, we're looking also at the development of a green port in the north, which will serve as a facility to export the green hydrogen, and also to serve as a hub where ships that are now transitioning to clean energy could see Dominica as a potential for providing clean energy to the ships that have retrofitted to be able to clean hydrogen, clean energy. So.
Wonderful. So Nelson, I met Nelson. We were speaking jointly on a panel, and Nelson had the most beautiful data set about what was happening in the global hydrogen industry. So Nelson, tell us a little bit about this international landscape for green fuels, and how is the shipping industry looking at it, and a little bit about how can the region position itself well to capitalize on that opportunity.
Yes, thank you very much, Raquel, for the invitation here. At COP, we don't hear much about shipping, but shipping transports 90% of all goods around the world. It emits 3% of CO2 emissions, but without shipping, even through the pandemic, we wouldn't have anything on our homes. So it's an economic sector that has tremendous importance. Having said that, on the decarbonization pathway, of course, we're looking at globally at energy efficiency and bringing those emissions down. But shipping has already been through several transitions in the past, from wind, coal, as well to fuel oil. Now we're entering our fourth revolution, and we're looking at what type of fuel will the shipping sector use, and we need to find out the scale and take up that fuel within this next 28 years just to comply on the IMO strategy for 2050. When you look at that, that sounds okay, that's a challenge, but what about the scale of what this means? And for the shipping sector, we estimated the amount of electricity that we would require to produce those fuels. When I'm talking about methanol, hydrogen, ammonia, biofuels, electricity, and the amount is just outrageous. 3,000 terawatt hour we would need. What is that? Double the current renewable energy generation in the world, just for shipping. So what has that meant for us as an industry is that we will not decarbonize alone. We need to work with other sectors, energy providers, ports, finance, but more importantly with governments that have a long-term vision, like-minded, that are able to plan ahead for production facilities close to the ports for the shipping industry to consider. Vessels take about 6 years in their planning. In renewable energy, we know also have large lead times in the production. This needs to be aligned. So coming back to the Caribbean opportunity, I don't think shipping has recognized the potential or understood completely the potential. What will be needed is for each of the countries, or as a whole, as a region, present very clearly who are the governments, which are the governments that are planning, how much is that planning there with respect to scale. We're expecting X million tons by that year. For shipping to consider and put its eyes, because there is tremendous interest in being part of the investment even, but more importantly on the logistics that will be required to move those fuels ahead. We no longer are looking just for fuels for the sector, we're looking for countries that will produce the scale needed to transport those fuels for other sectors, steel, cement, power around the world. And that is the opportunity, I think. Money-wise, there is a lot of financial opportunity on feasibility studies, and we've been talking to IDB and others in making sure they're enabling financial mechanisms that can accelerate the visibility of the production at scale in the Caribbean.
Wonderful. So Leland, tell us about what IDB Invest is working on and how do you see IDB Invest getting involved in these kinds of projects?
Super, thank you. So I was thinking I had many thoughts about you were talking about the potential that Dominica had and also the potential demand from the ports, because I think that's one of the things that the investment officers, when they're looking at doing a transaction, will try to see if there is a technology and there is a technology provider, that there is some kind of purchase agreement of that technology, or either the energy or whatever you're exactly producing in this case. And it sounded to me like, oh, this is like a perfect match. You have the country that wants to produce green hydrogen, and you may be able to have some kind of already agreements to provide that green hydrogen to specific ports or the shipping industry. But that sounds easy. It's not that easy on the ground. First of all, many of these studies, the feasibility studies, they take time. They take the time that, when you see the numbers of years that we have, if we want to reach 1.5 degrees, probably we don't have. So many of the conversations that I've been hearing in this COP is how do we accelerate? How do we have the results of those studies faster? So there's a way to kind of jump ahead and not have that waiting time of the results. But there is time that takes to develop these ideas. The gentleman before was talking about CRIF. Just to give you a sense, we at IDB Invest started in 2018 thinking about how the CRIF model could be applied to water utilities in the Caribbean. There are private water utilities, and how we could do all the analysis, and we even presented ideas of different funders like Green Climate Fund and other donors, and they were all very excited. And to this point, we are now, it was an idea incubated in IDB Invest that it went on to the public sector side, because they were going to basically work with CRIF to see if they can adopt it. It's been, 4 years, and it's not there yet. So I just want to put the timing issue, which we don't have, but unfortunately these processes take time. The other point that I wanted to mention is that we are seeing a lot of hype around green hydrogen in the region. We have a project in Chile right now, that in the south of Chile, and the truth is that the amount of green hydrogen that we're talking about, it will require a lot of licensing, a lot of environmental and social licenses by the government, and we are thinking that we may have to strengthen a lot the environmental ministries of those countries to be able to have those licenses in place. Otherwise, we will have a bottleneck of not a lot of private sector trying to invest in this new technology, but not having all the processes in place. And then the financing. The financing, I think, yes, it's probably there, but again, we need to figure out if there is a right contract in place, if there is if the environmental and social safeguards are taken into account, and then to the point that was mentioned before, to make it bankable, many times, at least what we have seen and we have learned from the Caribbean, is that the financing, unless it's an international company, it needs to be in local currency. Because otherwise, in addition to the other risks that you will have the currency risk, because you take financing based on dollars. And so local currency becomes an issue when you want to basically create financing also for the Caribbean. So it's not that I want to say that it's impossible. I think this is a perfect initial match, but there are issues, and the devil is always in the details to be able to promote this type of investment.
Definitely, and certainly, I think it is with us, so we'll look at the challenges that we face, that we'll be able to overcome them. What we are certainly advocating for is that we don't look at the challenges as insurmountable and decide to give up, that we have to try, like with all of these other things as it relates to climate action. So just going back to Francine for a minute, and I know that it isn't your project, and I don't need you to go into the details, but tell us, what is the Dominican National Financing Vehicle, and how is that envisioned to be a tool to attract investment that will ultimately help you in your geothermal exploration?
Thank you very much. And if I may just, before I answer that question, just react very quickly to what my colleague on my right has said. In relation to how long we can measure geothermal, we have looked and we've done a gap analysis of the legal and regulatory framework with the World Bank. We do have legislation in place, as I've said, but the exercise that we've gone into has identified certain areas where we need to improve the legislation, which we'll be working on. On the issue of currency, the Eastern Caribbean dollar has been tied to the US dollar at a fixed rate for over 30 plus years. So in relation to the currency issue that you raised, I don't think that that's a major issue for us. And we have been on this journey for many years now. We've made significant investments in looking at the potential for geothermal in Dominica. We've drilled 3 production wells. We know that the resource is there. We've seen the behavior of the resource over a period of time. So a lot of work has gone into what we're doing in Dominica. Just to say, in relation to the National Financing Vehicle, financing is always an issue. And notwithstanding the fact that we think that what we're developing can serve as a bankable project that will attract financing, we're also looking at creative ways to provide financing not only for that project but for our wider resilience building. So the National Financing Vehicle is one such of those vehicles that we're looking at, which is really creating an avenue for private sector investments. We've looked at 3 different pillars for investment in different areas, and it's done in an independent way. It's going to be separate from the government. It will be a structure that is developed with shareholders, shareholder investors who will indicate and invest in particular projects that have been identified by investment committee. And the idea is to raise at a minimum of $100 million that we can be invested in a number of projects in particular areas that can provide a return for investors on their investment. And this is financing that could be used for investing in the geothermal project or investing in other projects as well. I like the what said here in relation to the interest of the shipping industry in the potential of the region to be able to provide these green solutions for what they're looking at. And I would welcome a discussion to see what their demand, how we can meet their demand. Because I think there's a lot of potential, not just in Dominica, but in the region generally, to be able to position itself to take advantage of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francine. I appreciate that. So, Nelson, just, you outlined what we need to do in terms of making sure that we're packed. Where do we start? Do we start with ICS? Do we come to you? Do we start with some of the biggest shipping players? Do we start with the tourism, the cruise ships? Where do we start in this effort to try and attract this attention?
Yes, thank you. We actually started. Yes, we need to stop talking and doing. And we always call for regulation. Hopefully the mandates will be there. But industry has been fed up with the rhetoric. So what we created already with industry and the governments that are really keen on this is an initiative called the Clean Energy Marine Hubs, which is if your country has committed to include in their planning, in the long-term planning, either hydrogen or low-carbon fuels, make sure that includes close to the ports. And if that includes close to the ports for production, and remember, we're shifting from renewable energy for power sector to renewable energy for fuels. And there's a lot of learning, contracts, flexibility, stakeholders there. But if you are one of those countries, then welcome to the club, which is Norway, UAE, Canada, Panama, Uruguay, already countries that are willing to share knowledge, best practices, eliminate bottlenecks, and attract investors that are also looking for the opportunities in this niche, which is constructing facilities, renewable energy facilities for fuels close to the ports, alignment with shipping, alignment with finance. So that's a way to start. So we have this initiative. We hope by COP28 we don't announce countries, we actually announce hubs that are being built, that are creating jobs, that are looking at safety, that are increasing the pathway for these fuels.
Sign us up. Sign us up. All right, so Helen, and I prefer to, as much as you said, hype around green hydrogen, excitement around green hydrogen. But yes, and so I think that there is a lot.
Don't get me wrong, it's not that I wanted to say that it's bad, it's just that there's a lot of hype, and your example is amazing, and I hope Dominica is the blueprint from later in the future as an example of things that need to be done. It's not like you hear the concept of Dominica and you say, I can do it tomorrow. That's the only thing, because you've been working on it for a long time.
And they have a really impressive framework in place. And when we talk about the resilience program, we talk about that experience that we had with Dominica and how much thought they've put into this transition and how that is in fact a blueprint for others to follow in terms of thinking through what their priorities are and having methodology for the transition. But what I want to ask you about is what is the low-hanging fruit? What is IDB Invest sees the low-hanging fruit? What are some of the things that we can attack? You can attack now, or we can attack now in the region using IDB Invest funding as an example.
So in general, we do have a target on climate finance and green finance. So we are trying to support more of these projects that are either renewable energy, solar, wind, of course, new technologies that are like the bifacial types of solar panels, not on the one side, but on both sides, electromobility. So there are many technologies that we're trying to promote to to support the move to low carbon investments in the region. And for that, we do have not only a target, so the investment officers are looking for these types of investments, smart culture, etc. But we also have resources from Canada and other donors that help us use and do blended finance to basically reduce the interest rate or create a longer tenor or take a different type of position like a subordinated loan, mezzanine, etc. to basically try to promote the adoption of these technologies. So we have an area of instruments that are at the disposal to try to move forward this agenda faster.
Wonderful. And thank you so much. I know we've run out of time for this panel, but I really thought that we started a great conversation, and we will have a lot more to discuss both with IDB Invest and with ICS. Francine, I'm going to ask you to stay put. And I want to thank Helen and Nelson so very much for joining us today. Thank you. All right, and last but not least, Caribbean Development Bank, and yes, Mahama Sayuti, the Senior Climate Change Specialist at the Adaptation Fund. And so wonderful. All right, wonderful. So in this last roundtable, we're talking about measuring vulnerability to strategically direct impact financing, right? And we're going to start with Francine, because I think what they do and how they've been doing it has been so incredibly impressive. We in 2020, we embarked upon a process to create a resilience scorecard for the region. So having countries be measured by their own priorities rather than some sort of third-party measure. And in that process, the coalition working with New Energy Invents and the IRAC, the Islands Resiliency Action Challenge, which was amazing in putting together this group of stakeholders to work on the resilience scorecard. We started working with Francine and her team. And I remember when we first sat down with Francine and we said, we need this long list of data. She said, you will have it by next week. And I said to the team, will never happen. And lo and behold, not only did they meet the deadline, they met the deadline, exceeded the deadline, and were able to provide a nuance in the data set that we hadn't anticipated. So I'd love to hear Francine, just tell us about Green's approach and how are you so data-driven in what you're doing and focused on the plan of executing to build resilience and building this first climate resilient nation.
Thank you very much, Raquel. And just to say to you all that in 2017, Dominica was absolutely devastated by Hurricane Maria, which is a Category 5 storm. The country was shut down literally for weeks, and it has taken a very long time for us to recover. But immediately after Hurricane Maria, the Prime Minister expressed the vision to make Dominica the first climate resilient nation. And that required us to go to the drawing board and put together a plan to make Dominica climate resilient. There was no blueprint that we could follow. We had to create for ourselves what that plan should look like. And so we would have developed first a national resilience development strategy and then a climate resilience recovery plan. And in that climate resilience recovery plan, we've identified 20 targets that we want to achieve by 2030. And we've based that plan on 6 result areas that speak to a number of different things: strong communities, well-planned and durable infrastructure, a robust economy, among others. Now, for us, we would have identified where we want to be by 2030. And we would have, in developing the 20 targets, we would have set ourselves to achieve it. We needed to think about how could we measure progress? How could we set a baseline and be able to track our progress towards achieving those targets by 2030? So we would have in conjunction with the ministries of government, looked at developing what are the metrics or indicators that we needed to monitor in order for us to say that we're moving the needle towards achieving those targets. And while we were in the process of doing that, we became aware of the Island Resilience Action Challenge, which also was looking at developing a resilience scorecard. And that fit in very nicely with what the work that we were doing, because this provided a tool that could electronically measure the achievement of the targets that we were that we have set for ourselves. So it required us to work with the ministries and look at what is the data that would need to be captured in order for us to be able to say that we're making progress. And so each ministry had to align its strategic plans and policies to our climate resilience recovery plan and develop the indicators and provide data in relation to those indicators. And so we approached it in a structured way to ensure that all of the work, the budgeting, the policies, and plans of government were aligned to our climate resilience recovery plan, and that the ministries are providing data to be able to provide, first of all, what the baseline would have been, and also to be able to show how we were making progress towards what we wanted to achieve. One of those targets is for us to have 100% renewable energy by 2030. So we would have started with about 20% of hydro. We spoke about the geothermal. The geothermal is going to provide about 50 to 70% of our energy needs, and then a small percentage of solar. So we're tracking progress of each of those result areas, and this resilience scorecard provides an electronic means of being able to track that progress. It's an advanced software that's being used, and what it allows is in putting the information into the resilience scorecard, it tracks how any activity impacts on the 6 result areas that I spoke about. So you can basically any projects that government is interested in getting engaged in, you can put it into the scorecard, and it will give you a clear idea of which result areas that project can contribute to, or alternatively, that it's not contributed to. So it provides an objective assessment for you of whether the project that you've conceptualized in fact meets or contributes to the meeting of the targets that you want to achieve by 2030. So it's a fantastic tool in that it provides governments with information in relation to each of the projects that it will consider spending money on to determine whether that is in line with our resilience objectives. The same thing for any project that any investor would be interested in. You can pass it through that tool, and it will indicate to you how much of that, or to what extent that project is in fact helping lawmakers to achieve its goal by 2030.
Thank you so much, Francine. I love the enthusiasm with which you talk about the resilience scorecard. It really makes me feel good. All right, Mohammed, so please tell us a little bit about the adaptation fund and just sort of level set so that we understand where your perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Raquel, and again, thanks for inviting us. It's the second time. We're really happy to be part of this conversation. The Adaptation Fund is one of the funds that is serving this convention, the Paris Agreement. It was initially set up under the Kyoto Protocol, and this year we're celebrating our 15 years anniversary. So you're welcome to an event that we're organizing in a few minutes at 6 p.m. Sorry to be compared. Yeah, so it's been 15 great years. I mean, the fund has been under operation and serving vulnerable communities to adapt to climate change. So we are the first fund that has pioneered direct access modality. So we make sure that countries access to our funding in a direct manner. So it means that we accredit entities that are national ones, As of today, we have 57 implementing entities, and out of those 57, we have 34 that are national implementing entities. And talking about the Caribbean and maybe in general about the seats, we have about 8 of these entities that are operating in seats, and we hope that we will get more of those. Now, in terms of funding availability, we, as the name of the fund stands for, we do only provide funding for adaptation. But the adaptation fund works on the basis of country ownership. So it means that only the countries that are the one deciding where to invest and where to provide fund, to use the funding for their adaptation. So we do not have any sector priorities or any sector allocation. I mean, we have a country allocation of $20 million, and countries are the one deciding how to use this money. So as of today, we have a portfolio of about $1 billion. It's a bit more than $1 billion, and it covers about 100 countries. Out of the 140 countries, 40 projects that we have about 25% in 6 countries. That doesn't represent any funding allocation. It just represents the amount of funding that is going to this part of the world. Now, since 2019, we are officially serving the Paris Agreement, meaning that we are getting more and more support from donors. As initially set up, we were supposed to receive the share of proceeds from the CDM under the Kyoto Protocol, but as many of you know, that has not worked well. So we rely on voluntary contributions since then. And this morning we had our contributor dialogue meetings, and we're happy to announce that we are receiving more and more new contributors, and that expand the base of the adaptation contribution. So in Glasgow, we have received a record funding pledge of about 360 million, and this year we are also counting a bit something about 200, but we're still counting. Now, just to finish maybe the question about what is the adaptation fund, one thing that we have been doing over the last 5 years is to work on our medium-term strategy. So we have 3 pillars: action, innovation, and learning and sharing. And one thing that the adaptation fund has been doing over the last 5 years is to make sure that the adaptation is first and foremost local. You know, we make sure that the funding from the adaptation fund address the local issues. And though the priorities of the countries is the most important, but we try to make sure that the countries address adaptation in the local manner. So we have a window which is called enhanced direct access. It means that countries can use this money, which is outside the country allocation. It's the money that can fund up to $5 million of the project to make sure that the beneficiaries on the ground are executing this project. So that they identify the investment and they execute this project. So there are 2 objectives of this modality. One is to build capacity at the local level, because by executing they can come up with some new way of addressing climate. And second is that we hope that by doing so we can help at least the local communities to be more resilient in a way that we can expand some of this investment beyond what the fund can do. So we have right now scaling up framework with some of the sister organizations like the Green Climate Fund. So we do have some projects by the adaptation fund that were initially funded for something very modest, and that the GCF has scaled up some of those. So I'll stop here, but again, the fund is really ready to advance the adaptation in this region, where the adaptation issues are the most crucial ones.
Wonderful, thank you so much. All right, Senor Best, tell us about the investment priorities of the Caribbean Development Bank, and maybe a tiny bit of background on that, just for the people, because we will have people who will be watching online and who may not be as familiar with the institution.
Sure, thank you so much, Raquel and CCSA for having us here. We are the Indigenous Development Bank of the Caribbean. We were established to be the leading catalyst of development resources, mobilize development resources into the Caribbean, having special regard for our less developed countries. So we have 19 borrowing member countries, all of the English-speaking countries in the Caribbean, and as well as Haiti and Suriname. We cover all of the development sectors of our borrowing member countries, and we provide as I said, development resources, also policy advice, loan, TA, grant resources, mobilize resources from the Adaptation Fund, Green Climate Fund, and others, and seek to build partnerships such as the one with CCSA and others across the globe, really, to bring awareness to the not only challenges of the region, but more importantly, the opportunities that the region has, and really the substantial upside of the Caribbean as an investment space. Yeah, so on a broad level, that's what we do. In terms of our development priorities, within the context of certainly this forum, just to put it in a frame, between 2017 and 2020, we approved US $233 million in climate financing. That accounted for 15% of total approvals during that period. Now, what we have committed to do as at the end of last year is by 2023, 2024, increase the portion of our resources that are come for climate financing from 15% to 25 to 30%. So we are committed to doubling the climate financing that the bank will be putting into the region over the next 2 or 3 years.
Excellent, excellent. We will hold you to that.
Well, our board is holding us to that, and we intend to step up to that. I should note, for instance, with the Adaptation Fund, an example we heard Isaac speak about St. Lucia earlier. We mobilized US $9.8 million in grant resources from the Adaptation Fund for the development of climate resilience in the agriculture sector in St. Lucia, and it will focus on 4 agricultural zones in St. Lucia. We have, of course, the US $50 million integrated utility services mobilized from the Green Climate Fund, working with the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. So, we have a plethora of different pools of funds. We also have a series of approximately 5 readiness proposals and 4 project preparation facilities underway, which are focusing on increased water and sanitation in the region, mobilizing private capital to unlock climate financing. So we have, as I said, a plethora of resources and programs underway to drive climate resources in the region. Because, as you've said in the past, Raquel, there's an urgency to this crisis that we're in. We are excited to the work that's happening, of course, in Dominica with respect to green hydrogen. And if I could say just a little bit on that, because CDD has been at the forefront of providing concessional resources, not concessional resources, grant resources to de-risk the geothermal effort in the OECS. Know that it has certainly picked up momentum. It's easy to forget that the commercial sector looked away from this, understandably so, because we didn't know what was beneath the earth. And this is the role of the NDB community, as I said, being the indigenous development bank of the region. We stepped up and provided the resources necessary to really seek to unlock the geothermal resource that we have. And we are quite keen to continue supporting that, but also to go a step further to support the green hydrogen effort. We are pretty excited with what's happening in Dominica. And as I said yesterday, we believe in that space, the Caribbean needs to be the center of the universe. We have a captive market and we have a captive source of energy. No other region in the world has that. Let's stop there.
Wonderful, and absolutely agree. I could not underscore that anymore. So Francine, considering the work that has gone into Dominica, understanding what your priorities are and how those rule out and the ability to select projects and be very clear on this supports our development objectives, it does not support our development objectives. Tell us about the closing the financing cost gap, because now you have a very clear picture of what needs to happen and what are the priorities. So how do you close the financing gap identified by that prioritization to understand, okay, what kind of funding is required to move this project forward, and how do you sort of determine what that is?
So, just in answering your question, currently, or in extension of what the work that we've done with the Resilience Scorecard, is some further work that we're doing with the Island Resilience Action Challenge Task Force to identify what we refer to as the resilience cost gap. And the resilience cost gap can be defined as the difference between what you would normally have done and the difference to make that activity more resilient. So, for example, you would have spent, let's say, 100 million in building roads and bridges. But now, because you have to build those roads and bridges to be more resilient, then you may have to spend 120, 130 million. So the exercise that we're engaged in now is identifying from different sectors what activities that they normally engage in and what is the additional cost that they are exposed to as a result of seeking to make what they do more resilient. And so that has required us gathering additional data from the different sectors, whether it be from the ports, from the electricity companies, from the ministries of communications and works, to look at what are the practical impacts that the imperative to build resilience is having on their bottom line, and on what is costing them to become more resilient. And really and truly, we're hoping that we can develop an objective tool to determine what that resilience cost gap is, and then look at how we can fund that resilience cost gap. Because that is the reality that our small states in the Caribbean face. We are required to become more resilient, and that requires us to spend more money to become resilient. It will help us in the long run, but you have to find that additional sum of money to make yourself more resilient and to minimize the level of damage that you suffered, to be able to bounce back or bounce forward much quicker post-extreme event. I think the point was made earlier by Colin or one of the other panelists that we cannot adapt completely to the impacts that we will face from climate change. But there are actions that we can take to reduce the impact on us, and that requires us to have the funding to make those changes. So we look at different instruments. We have access to financing from the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, and other climate finance initiatives. The challenge that we have is that it does take so long to access those funds that really and truly the scope of projects keep changing whilst you're trying to go through the process just to be able to access the funds. So by the time you get an answer and you're able to begin to draw down on those funds, the scope of the project has increased tremendously. And this is the challenge that we face in our small islands. And so we have to find a way to be able to access funding that is either grant concessional, that is available much more quickly than we're able to access through those sources. And so we're hoping that the work that we're doing in identifying that resilience cost gap can then be used as a means of mobilizing the resources that will be required for us to address the issues.
And so, Mohammed, it sounds like we're calling out the Adaptation Fund. What are you guys doing to reduce the amount of time it takes to access resources? And we had a conversation with the heads of government meeting a few months ago with the Green Climate Fund. And at the time, the Green Climate Fund was saying that they weren't getting The reason that the Pacific was getting far more disbursements than the Caribbean was because the Pacific was far more active in applying for resources from the Green Climate Fund than the Caribbean. Is that the same with the Adaptation Fund? Are we also not necessarily leveraging access to the Adaptation Fund as well as we could? But first, address the issue of the time.
Yeah, well, I mean, access to finance can be quicker. I mean, there is a lot we can do. Right now, we believe that the flow of funding is improving. I mean, it's just a couple of figures. The adaptation fund portfolio right now is quite mature. We have about 65% of our portfolio under implementation, meaning that those are projects that are running on the ground and delivering results. We have about 70% of execution rate at the immediate project rate. I mean, if you take the timeline for immediate project. So that's what is in the portfolio. Now, it's true that bringing this idea of project to approval and then start implementation can take time. I mean, it depends on many factors. Sometimes the process is a bit long because in some of those countries, particularly the Caribbean, you don't have many national implementing entities. So you rely on multilateral implementing entities, and some of those do not have local presence on the ground. So there is kind of need to have a review process that takes time because you need to fly in and out. But at the adaptation fund, we do offer some capacity, and actually all of those are about capacity issues, right? So generating a project from idea to approval requires a lot of technical expertise, and sometimes the feasibility studies and so on requires some experts to fly in and out. So what we do at the adaptation fund is to really incentivize countries to come up with national implementing entities. They need to have the capacity to build this capacity at the national level by having their entity active for adaptation fund. So that's the best way for us to expedite this kind of finance access. Now we do have some additional support. You know, we do have some project preparation grant which helps countries to prepare those projects, because most of the time when the project is really not advancing quickly is because it's not ready. So the way to do so is to maybe work on this project before you come to the adaptation fund. And we do have some grants that are available for national implementing entities to prepare projects, to come up with a pipeline of projects that can be implemented. But I recognize that there is a lot that has to be done, and we are working on that. Now, in terms of accessing finance, we have different windows, right? The single country windows and so on. From the adaptation fund perspective, we believe that countries should maximize their access to finance when it comes to the climate finance. You do have the national allocation, but you have other windows, like the innovation window, you have the enhanced direct window, and in many cases, we do not see many requests when it comes, for example, to the enhanced direct access, although the opportunity is there. So perhaps we need to better explain where the funding can flow and so on. But yeah, I mean, that's what I can say. I just feel like access to finance has improved a lot over the last few years, but there are things that we should do to improve more. Yeah.
There remain gaps to be closed. All right. Well, we will make sure and help you with that, and continue to let you know when that's what we need. All right. So this is the question that I planned to ask you, right? But since we were talking about, and I did warn you that you were to be dynamic and ready. You said you were born ready. So this panel is supposed to be about our ability in the region to come up with solutions. So we've come up with the resilience scorecard, we've come up with the resilience cost gap, and we're using those things to measure and direct how we implement climate action. You know, my favorite thing from CDB is the
Yeah.
the recovery duration adjusted. So give us a little exploration into the RDA and what specifically the question that I always ask you is what can the rest of us do to support the implementation of the RDA as the standard that we use? Because I see that as being so very important in our way forward.
Thanks. Thanks for that. Okay, so I'm not sure how many persons here are familiar with the RDA. Essentially, the RDA is what we are proposing as a better measure than GNI to determine how concessional financing flows to countries across the globe. What do I mean by this? As it is right now, GNI is the metric to determine allocation of concessional resources. However, in the event that there is an exogenous shock, so a hurricane hits, and we've used this example before, sorry Francis, but we always call your country, and I think you would appreciate this. The same Category 5 cyclone hits Dominica and goes on to hit South Florida. South Florida, both vulnerable, both in the path of this cyclone. South Florida is able to recover far faster than Dominica. As a matter of fact, we just heard Francis speak about what happened in 2017. The GNI of South Florida is almost not impacted at all because it is a small part of a 50-state continent called the United States of America. However, the GNI of Dominica, because by virtue of the fact that Dominica is no longer able to produce, the GNI of Dominica takes a substantial hit. It takes a substantial hit. Now, the question then becomes, if the GNI of Dominica, or in the case of Barbados, takes that hit, shouldn't Barbados or Dominica now be eligible for concessional resources by virtue of where their GNI is now, by virtue of that hit? Going a step further, as I said, so Florida rebounds much faster. But there is a duration period that Dominica now has to go through to get back to wait for it. Not where they would have been in the absence of the cyclone impacting the country, but where they were at the point when the cyclone has impacted the country. So the 3 or 4 or 5 years that they're taking to rebuild, they're not rebuilding to be past the production level that they will have continued on, the trajectory they were on. They're rebuilding to just get back to zero, where they were at the point of impact. And we're saying what our model is seeking to do is to determine what that duration is, and as such, adjust what level of concessionary resources that country should be eligible for. And it is, I notice I say globally, it is not just referring to cities. It's not even just referring to vulnerable countries, it is referring to any country that suffers an exogenous shock. There is that period based on the internal resilience capacity of the country. So based on the IRC of a country, we can determine, given the level of shock that country experiences, how long it will take to recover. So it is no longer painting all the resources, allocation of concession resources with the broad brush that says you have this GNI, so you are or you are not eligible. Trinidad and Tobago first. Trinidad and Tobago may be considered a country with a relatively high GNI. It's not what most countries in the Caribbean are considered middle-income countries. I don't think persons living in Laventille or Ibiza or New Orleans in Barbados ordinary in Dominica would agree with this necessarily because across our country we have, regardless of which Caribbean country, we have substantial pockets of poverty and substantial pockets of vulnerability. So when we therefore take the internal resilience capacity of a country, notwithstanding the fact that we are all on the hurricane belt, we can determine how long it will take for any country in the world to bounce back and use that metric across the board, regardless of whether it's in Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, or the Caribbean, to determine what your duration will be to recover and determine the level of concessional support that you will receive. So this is where, now in terms of what support we need, look, we believe that the RDA is a logical, fair, and transparent framework to determine how resources are allocated. We believe this. I see Minister Quincy Murray here from Anguilla. Again, a country that may be considered, a tourist destination. Ideally, we would all want to spend our vacation, right? But those of us who are it's fine. Okay. But the fact of the matter is, with the alignment of the RDA, and whether really should be eligible for far more concessional resources, we should have complex conversations about this, because CDB, by virtue of the donor resources that we have mobilized, we are unable to provide and build the level of support that they justifiably should be receiving. So we're saying that GNI and even NBAs and PASPAS and the RDA is a just metric for which resources should allocate. And we really, the time now is for advocacy. The time now is for advocacy in forums such as these, and in fora across the development landscape and in your respective jurisdictions. That is how we see this being allocated. Because, I want to just, sorry, I won't answer your question, but I want to turn everybody's attention to the two pictures on the side. And some of you may know the story here already. You see the lady in the chair above, and if you look past the plant there, you'll see the lady in the chair as well. Right? Same woman, same location. She's on the beach at the top, she's in the sea in the bottom, celebrating her, I think it's a 28th wedding anniversary. Same location. This is happening in our lifetime. I'm just putting that out there. So this is why we think the need for concessional resources is so urgent as out there.
All right, thank you. See, this is what happens when you give a man a mic, All right, but I want, if you leave here with nothing else today, we want to impress upon you just three things. One, that primarily the issue that we find is not that there is not as great a lack of adequate funding that's available, because if you talk to the people who are sources of funding, they will tell you they are largely undersubscribed. It is that the sources of funding that we have don't fit the kinds of projects that we have, and there needs to be an entry point at which grant and concessional funding, like from the adaptation fund and some other concessional funding, can come in and help us to prepare projects so that we can access the larger markets where it will open the floodgates of funding that's available. That's the first thing, that we need to talk about climate finance in a different way, and we need to look at it through a different lens if we're going to close the gaps that exist. The second thing is, on loss and damage, we absolutely need global action on loss and damage, but there is a lot that is already being done, and there's a role for the private sector to play in closing those gaps on loss and damage. And so as much as we are frustrated by what's taking place in the negotiation and on the global stage, notwithstanding those who have made pledges, and we appreciate those pledges, we really do, But at the end of the day, we cannot remain sitting ducks and hoping and wishing and praying that there is resolution to finally funding loss and damage. We also need to put things in place like proper insurance facilities that can help us to protect ourselves while we close those great global gaps. And then last and most importantly, there are massive solutions that are available from our region. We are not just the victims. While we are on the front lines of a war that we didn't start, we are also needing to participate in the economic opportunity that this provides. This is a $1 trillion opportunity that the transition will create, and the Caribbean has solutions and innovations that are available, and we need to be seen as a source of those innovations so that we have an opportunity to participate in the financial flows that will take place. And with that, I thank you so much for your time and attention. I can open up for questions if there are any, but we really appreciate you spending the time with us this afternoon. Any questions?